Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Good Deeds Note Investing podcast. I am your co-host, Chris Seveney, along with Jamie Bateman. Jamie, how are you today?
Doing well. How are you doing, Chris?
Good. As I mentioned, I'm a little amped up this morning. Haven't even had my coffee yet, but it's been a crazy week and so forth and so on, but things are going well, and we've got a great episode today because we're going to tag upon what we talked about last week of like top 10 reasons why to invest in notes. Today, we're going to talk about top 10 reasons why not to invest in notes. So hopefully you'll enjoy this episode. But as always, before we get to that, let's talk about some trials and tribulations. And hopefully I don't go on my 45-minute rant.
It's a good thing you haven't had your coffee, I guess.
Oh, you are very fortunate. I haven't had coffee yet this morning.
Well, I have had a cup of coffee. And as far as recent trials and tribulations for me, it feels like this week it's been, some weeks it's like, oh, this note business is great. It's profitable. And, not so much this week. It just feels like I'm getting hit from all different angles I'm certainly not passing the buck on that, but legal fees and all kinds of things just getting thrown at me this week, and one of which was the
RESPA letter, right?
Yeah, it's a QWR, so it's a qualified written response request. So not the most expensive issue I've dealt with this week, but it surprised me for sure. Basically, we bought a performing note in Tampa, Florida, and out of the blue, my servicer contacts me and forwards me this QWR and / cease and desist letter that came from the borrower. So basically what it is I don't know if the borrower is confused about whether or not I actually own this note or what the behind the scenes issue is, but end of the day, I have to pay FCI $350 just to respond to this thing, at least. May end up being more, and there's nothing I can do about it. And so we have to FCI has to acknowledge within 5 days, I believe, that we received this request, and then within 30 days formally respond to this request to let the borrower know that, yes, we did indeed purchase this note and everything's on the up and up. It surprised me that there was a cease and desist letter involved, since this is a performing note. I've never had, we're not coming after the borrower or anything. So so this is how we're starting off our relationship with this borrower. So I do think that, it's not all the borrower. There are these companies out there that kind of market to borrowers and make money off of this. And we'll see where it goes. I did speak with Erin Quinn about it, and she essentially said that just let FCI handle it. She'll check it, but it would actually be even more expensive for her to do it. So it just surprised me because it's a performing note. We haven't even gotten a payment on this thing yet. And there's nothing I can do about it. And the borrower is essentially just making me, because of their action, I have to come out of pocket several $100s. So that's one of the things we've been dealing with. And then just kind of expenses adding up. But trying to keep the big picture and the long-term view in mind.
Yeah, expenses during like a COVID crisis will increase significantly because things are just taking longer. But one thing I'll mention about that QWR is make sure they respond. After the fourth day, just say, hey, have you drafted it? You ready to respond? Because if they don't respond, it can get pretty expensive. I'm saying it from a friend, my buddy over here. I may have been involved in a situation, which that is a whole nother rant, where a servicer didn't provide a qualified written response and ended up, costing me a lot more than $350. Let's just say that. But thankfully, I don't use that servicer anymore. But so for my trials and tribulations, and it kind of touches upon that topic, is, when you see people's true colors when there's conflict. And, this is a conflict-oriented business. In this past week, I've been dealing with a lot of different things, coming at me in the sense of I'm helping somebody right now who is two people right now who are in JV deals that gone bad. And how was the person who was sponsoring those, bringing them to a successful conclusion? Were they being honest? Do they have integrity? So kind of seeing that, and I'll tell you, it really just ticks you off to see how some people, hide or, basically do things, or, for me, I just view it as unethical. And, for me personally, I'm going through something right now where, I had a company basically, make a mistake, and, shame on me. I didn't read probably the agreement good enough. But I've also, spent a lot of money with them over time. And like anything, there's agreements in place, and then there's relationships. And, if it's something that you want to continue a relationship with, maybe you do things a little differently. And kind of like we mentioned offline, now, if you have a JV deal and you lose money, the contract says basically probably, oh, sorry, you lost money. I know many people who will make that person whole. I mean, I've done it several times in the past, from that perspective of making sure people are whole because of more relationships. So, been dealing a lot with that. I'll probably go on a rant later after I have legal finally review it, what my rant is. But, so from that perspective, there's a lot of frustrations in this business, kind of like what you're facing this week. And when I woke up on Monday, I was like, shit, I really don't want to do this week. But, then it's funny, I have, then only thing I can think about is Bill McCafferty when I don't want to, have have what I want, especially on Monday to get going. Because, if you've ever listened to Bill, it's just like, he just comes at you, and it's like the laser focused, I forget what the full term is, but,
he's really motivating.
He's motivating, and he basically he's like, you got to set up on Sunday night, and your Monday, you got to go out there and crush it. And it's funny. That's the only thing I can think of is, on Monday when I'm feeling down is, I've got Bill McCafferty on my shoulder screaming at me like, like my football coach in high school and stuff. But
yeah, he's great. I really enjoyed that episode you guys did a while back with him.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah. And he was on DME this week as well, talking and stuff. And I was kind of chuckling. I was going to post something in comments because it was him and I forget the other two other individuals, but they all were bald. I was sitting there thinking, like, they talk about note investing, and I'm like, I'm like, yeah, I'm seeing hairline,
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely more gray than I was a couple years ago.
Yeah. So. Oh yeah. So that's kind of, my, say my trials and tribulations that, this business isn't easy. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today is you have to have a pretty solid lining stomach, unfortunately. So, with that, why don't I'll let you start and let you roll through your kind of top 5, and then I'll probably go through mine, but I know I'm gonna as always chime in because I can't shut up as you go through some of these things.
Sounds good. So yeah, I mean, everything I'd say in life has pros and cons for the most part, and note investing is no different than that. There certainly are a lot of positives, like we talked about last week. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this business. But there are certainly downsides to note investing as well. So really in no particular order, the first is there's no preferential tax treatment. So there's no real tax advantage to investing in notes as compared to, hard real estate like a buy and hold rental property. There's depreciation and just certain tax benefits that are kind of written into the code to encourage investors to participate in, invest in that asset class. I'm not saying there are no tax advantages ever to running a note business, but as far as buying a note and holding that note and collecting interest, you're going to be taxed at your normal your income rate. So
ordinary income.
Thank you. There's no built-in tax treatment or benefit. Number 2,
actually, can I just make one comment on that? And that's why you see a lot of people use their self-directed IRAs for note investing. Using it for rentals and so forth. If I had 2 buckets of money, if I had my own cash and I had retirement money, all the retirement money would go in notes. All the cash would go mostly in real estate, because real estate with your own cash has better taxable treatment than notes does. So,
Yeah.
that's something to consider. But as always, we're not CPAs, accountants, so
No,
talk to them.
but I totally agree, and I try to do the same thing as well. Just my self-directed Roth has got notes in it, and I have no intention of buying rentals in that. So the second thing that's a downside to investing in notes is there's tons of moving parts. So I think you may touch on this a little bit later, Chris, but there's so much paperwork and just a lot of things going on. So and that's, if you're not up for that challenge, running a note business probably isn't for you. There's just a whole lot of things that can be really expensive if you just miss one of those things. It's none of them individually are rocket science, but you've got to keep track of a lot of vendors. You're dealing with the books is really important. All kinds of details and paperwork. And if you're not a detail oriented person or you can't keep track of moving parts, this might not be for you.
Yeah, you got to be organized.
Yeah,
You definitely,
absolutely.
because the difference I'd say between conventional real estate and notes is, especially on distressed notes versus distressed house, there's statute of limitations on things, on what you can do. And if you miss a deadline, it can be fatal. Whereas if you bought a house to fix it up, I mean, as long as you're paying the taxes, there's no deadlines. I mean, you can take 5 years to, fix up a house, whatever. You kind of do it at your own pace. Notes, you got to pay attention because there's a lot of moving, like you said, moving parts and deadlines that if you miss something, it can be, you can lose everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I've said before, but this note business really boils down to three things, and one of those three things is asset management. And there's, people say, oh, it's passive. Well, not so much. So you got to be on top of everything, even when you're owning the note, not just during your due diligence. Third item is the value of the asset actually decreases over time. Now I'm talking about a performing note. And of course, there are other external factors to consider, like market conditions and how much buyers are willing to pay for a note. So certainly a note can increase in value, but in general, compared to a buy and hold rental property, it's going to go down in value. If you buy a performing note and just hold it for 20 years, that principal balance is going down. So whereas a rental property in most markets over the long term is going to appreciate, even though you get that depreciation tax benefit, the actual asset itself is going to go up in value. So that's another downside.
Yep. I also would make the statement, and people can agree or disagree, that non-performing assets also depreciate because your expenses continue. So,
True.
over a course of a year, from January 1 to January 1, if you hold a non-performing asset during that year, you have servicing, you have taxes and other costs that you have to pay, but also the property is not being well kept. And while there might be some home appreciation in that area, typically, that is offset by the house continuing to probably have more damage, whether it's a roof leak, whatever the case may be. But, very rarely does a non-performing asset, probably actually appreciate. And if it does, again, it's offset by all the costs that you're spending.
Yeah. And if the homes are appreciating in that area, that means, well, taxes are going to go up. Insurance is going to go up, so yeah. Like you said, the expenses keep going up.
Yeah.
Number 4, leverage. You certainly can go out and borrow money to buy a note, or buy a note and then borrow money against that, use that note as collateral, as hypothecation. But it's not quite as simple as going out and walking into your bank and saying, I want to buy a rental property and getting a loan on that. So that's a downside. I'd say it's not quite as easy to leverage your note portfolio as it is a rental portfolio, for example. I know this isn't a straight comparison to rentals, but it's not an inherent benefit to investing in notes.
Yeah, it's two completely different ways of getting funding. On hard real estate, you have to have a really good credit score, where you can get financing from a bank, or you're getting hard money where it's based on the deal.
Mm-hmm.
And this business is more kind of like that hard money,
Yeah.
which takes the time to, actually grow. Well, let me step back. Based on that, though, if you're buying a rental, it doesn't matter if you've owned a rental or not before. All the bank cares about is what's your credit score, can you pay? On a hard money loan, it's more asset based and really more based on your experience if you're trying to renovate something.
Yeah.
And on a note, it's very similar. So in order to kind of raise money in that sense or get money, you have to, whether it be market or have a lot of conversations with people, it's just a different way of getting money. Once I find that you can get some money coming in the door, I find it's much easier to continue along that path. But getting started, I think, is much harder. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you're not, like I said, you're not just going to walk into a regular bank and get a loan on a note that you owe,
No.
or to go buy a note. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely more of a hurdle there.
Mm-hmm.
Number 5, this industry, I think, am I going to trigger you now, Chris? This industry is, some call it the wild, wild west. I mean, I do think in the last few years, I mean, there's been more regulation and more kind of laws involved to, debt collection laws and that kind of thing to try to regulate this industry. But in general, it's the wild, wild west. So there are definitely sharks out there, or maybe not even people that intended to be sharks, but people that are incompetent and or unethical. So whether that's other note investors or vendors, you really got to understand who you're working with and build that element of trust. Trust is always important in general, but it's real easy for someone who's not trustworthy to operate in this space.
Yeah, and this goes back to, I mean, we can beat the dead horse on this one about due diligence on people, but when I hear stories of people, sending somebody, 6 figures on a closing and don't go through escrow, and they never even get the notes back, that's just completely, I mean, I'd love to hear an explanation on that. People JV with somebody on a note that's performing, they've collected $15,000 payments over the last 3 years and don't give a penny to that partner, and then basically, run off with their money. Try and explain that to me. It's very, in that, on vendors, everybody makes mistakes, and, I make them, you make them, we all make them, but it comes back to, again, how are you operating your business? And a lot of these businesses, run in 2 ways. They're either bigger and thinking you're a small business, they can just squash or take advantage of you, or vice versa. They're a small business and aren't mature enough to know how to handle certain situations when they get themselves in trouble, and then probably just follow what everyone does on Facebook and social media, and does something that probably is not the right thing. But yeah, I mean, for note investors, I mean, it's like you said, you can basically go lend money, or there's no, even though there is regulation, nobody's watching over it.
Right, and it's also just to get into the industry. They asked, I was on another podcast and I was asked, how hard is it to be a note investor, scale of 1 to 10? And I said something like, to get in is real easy. I mean, it's like probably 1 or 2 just to become a note investor. It's really not that hard, but should you? I mean, so I compare to, with Wall Street investing, there are all kinds of different series. You can get your CFA, Series 7, Series 6, all these licenses to manage money and be a professional, stockbroker, stock investor. Whereas in this, anybody can get in. So the barrier to entry is really low, which can be a positive, but it also invites the potential for fraud or, real incompetence.
I mean, you can stay at a Holiday Inn last night and then wake up a note investor, which kind of rolls into, I mean, you touched upon it, but, one of the reasons that, again, why not to, is this is a very heavy regulated industry, and to do it right, it's expensive. I mean, to get licensing and so forth, and people, I don't need that and stuff. And I kind of joke to some people, like, I'm not going to tell you whether or not to get licensed or not, but in some states, they almost tell you, you're better off not getting one. But I know, like, I know one investor who got whacked pretty hard for something that was dealing with a JV agreement. I got another one who got whacked because they didn't have a license in that state. And some states will just force you to get the license, others will fine you. But there's things like you said, this qualified written response. If you don't reply, you basically violate, I don't know if it's fair debt or RESPA, but one of them. And I've been in a situation where that occurred, and it cost me thousands of dollars because of a simple mistake of not responding to a letter. Now, if you're a fix and flipper, okay, maybe you get a nuisance lien or something like that. Typically there's several occasions where you still have a chance to fix it. Here, it's kind of like, if you didn't do it, they're not, especially another attorney on the other side, they're not going to work with you.
No.
It's going to cost you.
Yeah, for sure.
So that was my number 6, which kind of number 7, kind of rolls into, tag along with that, is this is a conflict oriented business. And what I mean by that is, you're dealing with conflict typically on a daily basis, especially on the non-performing notes. The conflict is you have a borrower not paying, and they want to stay in a property, and there's a conflict because you can't have both. You can't have somebody living in a property for free. So how do you resolve that conflict?
Yeah.
And there's no there's no playbook on how to deal with each situation. It comes from experience. But then you deal with attorneys, you deal with your servicers. There's a lot of mistakes that get made, and which leads to conflict, and it's going to be, how do you handle that? So if you're somebody who might be a little hesitant, don't recommend you be in this business. I know somebody who invested over $100,000 with somebody, and basically, they haven't seen a penny. And, I was, well, you kind of should get an attorney and do this and that. And they're like, oh, I don't want to get an attorney. I don't want to do this. And I'm like, if you're not going to fight for your money's not going to fight for you. And that person's not going to, I think some people think that, somebody's just going to magically wake up one morning and be like, oh, I can't believe I did these people wrong, or, whatnot, and just magically cut them a check. Maybe it happens. I highly doubt it. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah.
How thick a bullet, what type of bulletproof vest you need, or thick skinned, I should say, you need to be in this business?
Yeah, I think it boils down to, it kind of goes back to active versus passive, because anytime you're actively dealing with people in general, whether it's in your 9-to-5 job, your workplace, there's going to be conflict. So if I'm going out and buying a stock that's super passive, there's probably not going to be conflict there with, the Apple board. But so, because note investing deals with, you're dealing with people, whether it's borrowers, vendors, attorneys, whatever, inevitably there is going to be conflict. So you have to be okay with, people not liking you or making a tough decision. So, an example I had, as far as, I mentioned this one CFD in Michigan, we purchased it late last year, December 2019, and the borrower was paying, and then he kind of went dark, and turns out his wife had actually passed away, and he'd lost his job, but he wasn't communicating. He wasn't willing to play ball. So, we were moving forward with legal, and some people might see that as heartless, but you've got to be able to not shy away from conflict, for sure. I mean, now he's back on track, and we're communicating, and we're good. But I think if you don't show that you're willing to, do what you say you're going to do, whether that invokes conflict or not, then you're going to have issues in this business. So I think the fact that if you're going to be an active note investor, it requires interacting with people. And anytime you interact with people, there's going to be conflict. So you can't shy away from it. I don't necessarily seek out conflict, but you got to be willing to do what you say you're going to do and hold your ground for sure.
Yeah. And, so as part of, the conflict, and, I'm going to roll now into kind of next one, which I lost track of numbers, maybe number 8 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
This business requires significant management skills. And, I can argue with people that managing an asset is more important than what you pay for an asset. And, people can look at, basically what, how much is going to, what they should pay for it because what their expenses are, what it's worth. Basically, you're pretty much going to know what a seller is going to sell an asset for. I mean, it's kind of like, a car. There's set pricing on vehicles, on that notes. It's a range. It's like kind of buying a car. You can negotiate, but it's kind of, this is what you typically pay. Now, when you go to sell your car, is it really, more based off of, I'm using cars, which is probably a horror example because you're going to get, hosed either way, but I'll use it anyways. When you go to sell that car, is it based off of, what you paid for it? Or is it more based off of how you took care of it over that period of time? And that's kind of the analogy I'll use, is because I think how you took care of it over that time is extremely important. And,
absolutely.
For example, just managing, we got to manage, realtors, servicers, attorneys. And I can tell you right now, I've got an REO property in Iowa that company I've been trying to use to get this thing listed. They're all gung-ho at the start and they disappeared on me. So, and it's funny because I got them from the title company I'm having problems with. I'm having an issue with title company right now. I'm having an issue with an attorney right now who I've asked them 5 weeks ago, send a demand letter out. They didn't send it out. Last week, they asked me for updated payoff and reinstatements. Clearly, they didn't send it out. So now I'm trying to get them. So how do I force them, to send these, send everything out? Because, it's also difficult where you're managing from afar. When you work for a company, you're working internally, you go knock on someone's door, hey, we got to get this done, so forth. You can't do that in note investing, which is, it's great they can do it anywhere, but also sucks doing it from afar because unless you're constantly, sending a signal to them as a reminder, everyone's so busy, sometimes things just fall to the back of the list, which goes back to why you really need to be organized to make sure you stay on top of these things, because if you're not, then you go back to that potential fatal flaw that could happen. So
yeah, I'll just piggyback on that as far as I think if you're trying to scale in the note business, your business will come down to people and systems.
Absolutely.
As far as the operations of it, right? And so whether that means you're hiring 10 full-time people, which neither of us do, or whether that means you're primarily outsourcing through contractors and vendors, it still requires management, and both of those scenarios have their downsides. So I mentioned before, my wife works for me for the business for Labrador Lending. We could have a separate episode on that. And then recently I just hired someone to help out, not an actual employee, but a contractor, Stephen Burke. He's been great so far. Super organized. He's on the ball, but it still requires me to go back and say, wait a minute, what are my priorities here? Just being a good manager, being a good leader, because he's diligent with his tasks and everything doesn't mean that he knows what I want. So, and that's managing from afar as well. So no matter how you organize this note business, it absolutely is going to require management skills with people and systems. So yeah, that's critical.
I'm laughing because it's like, you and I had someone who was assisting us on some tasks and so forth, and they completely flaked on us. Yeah. And, kind of just goes back to a lot of things we've already said. But that was like, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, but it seems like it was 6 months ago already, just because, everything that's, going on. And, there's constantly, it's like one issue to the next. I mean, if anyone, I still do manage construction projects, and, it's basically, every day you wake up not knowing what's going to hit the fan, and you just go from one problem to the next, and you're just putting out fires. You feel like a fireman putting out, the proverbial fires of issues. So,
Yeah.
whew. Okay, so let's see. We talked a lot. One of the things I want to, last two items I want to talk about are, it's a high risk business because, you don't get to see the inside of the property. You're relying on people. Typically, the people you're relying on are very low paid. So let's take a BPO. A BPO is done by some associate who probably gets paid $10 to $20 to go take photos, hands it to an agent who just puts it in the system, probably sometimes may even look at the photos, probably not, and just runs, oh, what are some comps that sold in the area, puts it on a piece of paper, throws a number to it and sends it to you. Here's $150.
Yeah.
So, but reality is it's somebody probably making $10 to $20 that actually physically saw that property and really doesn't know what they're doing, looking at and relays that information.
Right. And the BPO realtors, the ones that do BPOs, I'm not bashing them, but usually if they're not working on multi-million-dollar deals, they're doing BPOs.
Yeah.
So they're not the most experienced realtors either usually.
Yeah. So that's one. Your servicers, nothing against servicers, but, debt collectors on average probably make, minimum wage in many states, $15 an hour. So, they're, many of them are good at what they do, but in the same token, it's very, it's compared to management level people, who, your attorneys who charge you, $200, $300, $400 an hour, it's somebody, on the lower scale from that perspective. And then again, with attorneys, it's, you got to be very careful with them, what they do. And then on title companies, I'm not even going to go on that rant anymore. So it's just something to, a lot of risk, that's involved to try and value an asset.
Yeah, for sure. And just not seeing the inside of the property. I think that's one reason some people like to originate their own notes, because they've got that, they've been inside the property, or at least they've got boots on the ground to really, they've typically bought the property and then they're seller financing it. Whereas when you're buying a note, you're not normally getting to see the inside of that property, and that collateral value is critical in this business. So absolutely.
So, and the last I'll say is, with this business, it's a learn by doing, and there's really no formal training programs, out there. I don't personally believe that taking a weekend course can give you the information you need. And there was, an interesting stat. We talked earlier about how my wife got me for our anniversary, the subscription to Mind Valley, which is pretty interesting. People should Google, look it up. But one of the things that they mention is with traditional learning, where say you read a book, 80% of what you read, you have forgotten the next day. So if you think of that, you're taking some type of training that say is simple numbers, 10 hours long over a course of a weekend. Okay. So you took 20 hours of training. If you're lucky, you may recall 4 hours of that, which if you're paying, $10,000 or $15,000, $20,000 for this training, and here's the other thing is you don't know a lot of the stuff. So I think 4 hours is probably a gift. But that's still somewhere between $2,500 to, basically, $4,000 an hour, which, are you better off taking that 10 grand and go buying a performing note? I don't know. I mean, but that's one of the challenges. I think there's no true formal training, which in this business, I view formal training is, something that is over like 3 or 6 months where, you're not going to learn this business in a weekend. You're not going to learn it in 6 months, but at least take the time to go through, spend 2 weeks on, breaking down a tape, or even longer, or break it into 20-minute segments of certain criteria so people thoroughly understand it, and then give them real world examples of how to institute it in the real world. Because most of the time you're sitting around a table, and conferences and stuff are good because you can pick up a lot of things. But for somebody starting out, you'll pick up little things, but how does it relate to real world, real life situations?
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. I mean, because it's such a niche industry, um, it's kind of like, selling snowblowers in Florida. Nobody has a snowblower business in Florida because, to do it and put it together, it costs a lot. And what is the real demand for it? So that's a challenge.
Yeah. I mean, there are some decent kind of starter programs and some programs that are for more advanced node investors out there, training programs. But yeah, I mean, in the defense of the people who put together these programs, not that either of us are attacking them at all, but it's impossible to put together something that's going to meet the needs of 20 different people, say, or 100 people in the program, and then somehow predict or foresee what's going to happen, or which way they want to go. There's so many different ways you can go in this business. That's impossible. So I think that is where, consulting programs and long-term programs can come into play.
Yeah, and I'm not knocking, like, it sounds like I am, but there's programs out there that are valuable, that provide good content based on specific needs or interests, that are much lower in cost.
Yeah.
From that perspective, and this is just my opinion, I'm just a firm believer that I don't care whether it's stock trading, day trading, fix and flips, real estate, wholesaling, MLM schemes, whatever it is. I just truly don't believe that you can really, over the course of a weekend in anything,
Right.
be good at it.
No, I totally agree with you. Yeah. I mean,
So,
you can go get a four-year degree and it doesn't mean you're going to be good at
yeah.
anything. So
Mm-hmm.
we're not knocking it at all, but you got to go and apply it. And I know that's how I learn, is by doing.
You apply it, and you have to, unfortunately, and again, this goes to, a lot of these, the certain programs, like I know, if you ever watch the psychology behind like these trainings, and I'm not relating to any specific note training, but there was one on stock trading. And, my sister-in-law was going for a weekend and my wife was like, can you please go make sure she doesn't pay for some, expensive training course? Because what they do in these trainings, and I'm not saying, this happens in notes because I haven't taken those expensive, super expensive or any real true note training programs, is they'll spend the weekend showing you examples of how you can make all this money. And they intentionally jump around and give you little snippets like, oh, well, you can do this. And by doing this, you do this. And their playbook is to be disorganized, and not give you a clear path of how to get there. They just want to show you what the end result is by confusing what that path is to make you think like, oh my God, I need somebody to show me. They intentionally, and there's videos, books about this, they intentionally convolute everything, and give you snippets of really good information on a few things, but never really give you any meat on that bone. And it's all intentional to basically be like, oh my God, it's so disorganized world. But if I come with you, you are going to guide me down that path and lead me to prosperity. And the people who are successful, I would question, would they have been successful with or without it? I mean, with or without that training.
Right.
Because typically most successful people, have some type of mentor, but at the end of the day, they're the ones that got to take the bull by the horns.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I worked with somebody in my real job, and, she would say, well, I'm not, we'd have these shared tasks that nobody wanted to do. Right. But it's a team. So if you have downtime, you go and do it. Right. Well, she would always say, well, nobody trained me on this. So I'm not going to do it. It's like, well, nobody trained me either. It's like, but I'm doing it. So I don't want to do it. And then she'd start coming to me to figure out how to do it. And it's like, I don't know how I became the resident expert here, but it's because I was doing it. So
yeah. I would have said, who trained you how to pick your nose? And well,
It's funny though, because it also reminds me of this topic, reminds me of our just having kids. I was doing jujitsu with my kids, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and COVID kind of put an end to that because if you want to contract COVID, there's really not a better way than up close and personal martial arts. But anyway, when the kids were doing that with me, we'd go for a month or something, and then I'd say, all right, we got to get in the car to go to jujitsu. And my daughter's like, well, no, I already know that. And it's like, because she'd had a few sessions, whatever. Yeah. So it's a lifelong process. You have black belts, that have been training for 20 years and they don't know jujitsu. You know what I mean? It's just, you're never done. So training is good for sure, but it's a go out and do and experiment and figure it out. And then go get some more training along the way. So
yeah, I agree. Training 100% is good. The challenge I just see in this business, and I'm saying this from the two perspectives. One is, I haven't gone out and taken it, so some people are always saying you're a hypocrite for this. I'm just taking the feedback I get from people. We hear from a lot of people from who talk about ask questions or stuff about the podcast, and I'm kind of known to kind of speak my mind on certain things and not afraid to kind of call it like I see it.
Wait, what? You, Chris?
Yeah, exactly. But in the same time, taking that feedback and just hearing what they explain to me. And when I talk about formal training, I'm referring to something that is a long-term growth strategy that really breaks down, goes through every single item over a period of time, and okay, Jamie, you just learned about bankruptcy, and then somebody hopping on a call with you to go through, okay, what did you learn? Okay, Jamie, what's the difference between chapter 7 and chapter 13? If you say you don't know, I'd be like, go back and take that training, because you didn't learn what you're supposed to learn. Right. So I'm thinking more of a, kind of like, a graded program almost, that, is out there. And like you talk about, with like FINRA and having certain series licenses where you have to take tests and so forth there, an MLO. I have an MLO license. I had to go through some type of program or something, get certified. And same thing with fix and flippers. There's no training on that, but honestly, that is, again, same thing. That is learning by doing, which this business is, but it also makes it harder to get in because it's very difficult to get a broad depth understanding.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Okay, so we talked today about the top 10 reasons why not to invest in notes. Are you going to stop investing in notes after today, Jamie?
No, I'm not. I'm trying to continue to grow my portfolio.
Good. So tag along into kind of our segment and wrap it up. What is your note and bolt for the day?
So my note and bolt is, when you're looking at a deal, when you're evaluating a deal to potentially buy a note, you really need to try to approach it from two angles. One is kind of the engineering / mathematician angle of running the numbers, but the other is more of the, I guess, liberal arts angle of understanding the story. So, and you may not, I'm not suggesting you spend 40 hours evaluating a note deal before you make an offer, but I think every deal has that kind of has both aspects to it. I think I heard this from Kevin Shortell, give him credit, which made me think about it. And I actually related to, I'm pretty into fantasy football, and you have these old school, fantasy football or just football analysts who are really good at kind of understanding the human element, and they watch the game film, and they get that these football players are people. And then you have, on the flip side, you have, especially now with more of the daily fantasy sports, which is a whole different topic, you've got more of the numbers people, right? And these, you might call them, they're more into the analytics and kind of crunching the numbers, but they don't even watch a single down. Well, I think the people that are most successful can do both, right? And so they understand that you got to crunch the numbers. On a performing note, your yield needs to be there. but there's also a story. So I think if you can kind of try to parse out both of those when looking at a note deal, you're going to be more successful.
That was deep.
That might have been I don't know. You think that was my best note and bolt?
That was good. So mine is going to be like 7 words, I think. If you have a borrower files bankruptcy, chapter 7 or 13, and it's dismissed, meaning that it gets thrown out for some reason, it's like it never occurred. So basically, for example, I had a pool that I bought, and there was a second in this pool. And basically, the property was at the time upside down. And the person filed bankruptcy, which, in there, basically it talked about how the second would get stripped, or there's something in there basically that second was getting lost. So, I bought this, and then, so I just like, okay, whatever. And then, as time went on, it's kind of like we always say, just let stuff sit in files sometimes. I just forwarded over attorney. I'm like, hey, because, there was still during the active bankruptcy. So I went and I checked, and I saw that it was, dismissed, like after, I don't know, 2 years or something like that. Reach out to the attorney. I'm like, hey, is this anything with this or anything, and so forth? And they're like, yeah, now that it's, been dismissed, it's like it never happened. So you're not stripped. And the interesting thing is, the person, the first now, they, basically were paying, they put a lot of money towards the first, and they were, I think, thinking the second was stripped, so they weren't doing anything with it. So now actually there's equity in the property, because they paid down the first. I'm in the second position. I think my balance is actually greater than the first at this point in time. So I'm like, oh, like all of a sudden I've kind of like now have something. So I'm like, okay, Miss Attorney, go do something with this, but, so it's interesting that, it's kind of like, the horn doesn't, it's not over till, certain person sings, and while they might be on stage singing, the song ain't over. You never know what can happen. And that's kind of what in this case is, okay, a person's like, oh, BK, and, threw it in as part of a pool because they were closing out their fund, wanted to get off the books and stuff. And lo and behold, it gets dismissed. So it's like it never happened. So just forget, it's like, what's the movie with Will Smith when they flash the Men in Black? It's kind of like the Men in Black where they, flash in front of you and you forget everything that just happened. It's kind of what you need to do when it is dismissed.
So, question for you: how easy is it for the podetized people to count the number of words that you just said? I think
pretty
it was more
easy
than 7.
because so what they do is they, as put show notes together, which they probably use Rev or whatever, to translate everything, and we can count. But I believe I'm going to go back and re-record this to say I'm going to say about 700 words, not 7. Well, I started simple, and then I was like, okay, I better explain myself. So the simple one was, let me go back. A dismissed bankruptcy is like it never exists. 8. So I was 8.
8 words.
Yeah. So I said 8, and we can go back and listen.
Right.
And I expanded upon it. Okay.
Got it.
I saw you, because we have video on. I saw you like going, Chris, please give me more. I need to learn more. So yeah, I was giving that to you, Jamie. So
thank you so much.
Free of charge.
Appreciate that.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up this episode?
No, sir. Good to go.
Good. Well, as always, thank you for listening to this episode of the Good Deeds Note Investing Podcast. Feel free to leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and Amazon also, I think, has something as well. But just go listen to us wherever you want. We try and provide you good content. As always, go out and do some good deeds. Thanks for listening, everyone.